Welcome, everybody. Are you all there?
Yes.
Okay. We'll make a start, and thanks all for being there. This is a special presentation by Friends of Erskineville. I'm a member of Friends of Erskineville. My name's Holly Ribeiro, and this is titled One Vote, One Value. And for those of you who are here, I'm sure you know what the basis of the conversation will be. So before I go on and introduce our speaker, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet all of us on the lands of our traditional owners. And for me, I'm meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I acknowledge all the other lands upon which you are joining us from today. And we all acknowledge the elders past, present, and emerging, and accept that this is Aboriginal land that has never been ceded. So just very briefly, we are hoping to wrap this up in about an hour. If that suits you, it might be shorter, depends. It's a fairly small number of us tonight. And we have one speaker tonight, and that's Stephen Blanks, and I'll introduce him to you in a moment. Just don't want to hold you up as any longer than we need to. So if you've got questions to ask, can I ask that you either put them in the chat, if you've got that chat option, put the raised hand on chat, or if all else fails, raise your hand, and I hope I'll be able to see you. And I think, where is he? Have we gone back? Andrew said that he will mute if it gets too much. I'll ask you all to mute yourselves until you are ready to speak. And also, if you're asking questions, can you please keep them brief and straight to the point? And I'm sure that if there are questions that Stephen doesn't have time to cover, we can go back to you later, Stephen, and ask you what some of those are. So I'm sure that's okay with you, if that's cheeky for me to say, thank you. Let me introduce Stephen Blanks. He's the former president and current treasurer of the New South Wales Council of Civil Liberties. He's got a wonderful CV, but the things that I pulled out of there that are of particular interest to Friends of Erskineville, things we've had conversations about in the past: intellectual property, human rights, advocating for asylum seekers, and your own long involvement with civil liberties for over 25 years. A quarter of a century is pretty awesome, Stephen. And I'm sure you're going to tell us where that all fits in with our current debate. So over to you.
Oh, thank you very much for that introduction, Holly. And nice to meet you all, even this way over Zoom. And somebody said, yes, we're all over Zoom meetings by now. As you can probably see, I'm coming to you from my very salubrious study at home, which doubles as my wife's wardrobe. So you can see her collection of clothes in the background. I must say the topic is fascinating, and of course it is a core civil liberties topic: one vote, one value. And I think I will start by observing that really that expression, one vote, one value, has to be understood in Australia as merely an aspiration, almost universally unobserved. There are only 2 Australian Houses of Parliament that use an electoral system where all voters are provided with an equal vote value. And these are the New South Wales and South Australian Legislative Councils. Every other parliamentary chamber in Australia, through a skewed electoral system, provides some voters with higher value votes than others. Consider the Senate. Tasmanians get a vote with a value 12 times the vote of us in New South Wales. So it's an aspiration. It's not. That's not to say that one shouldn't try and implement it where one can, but there are lots of countervailing values that need to be understood when approaching the subject. It's good to know that the concept of one vote, one value does have some expression in the in human rights. The International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, Article 25, provides that every citizen shall have the right and opportunity and without unreasonable restrictions, and take account of the debate going on about voting restrictions in the US at the moment, to take part in the conduct of public affairs through freely chosen representatives, and to vote and be elected at genuine periodic elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage. So there is the expression in the ICCPR which enshrines one vote, one value as a human right. As I said, in Australia, it's mostly unobserved. Even the High Court has described it as a political slogan and not a constitutional principle. The origin, well, perhaps where to understand where we are in and why we don't have a one vote, one value system in Australia is to understand we inherited our democratic system from the UK. And at the time we inherited it, the voting system in the UK was extraordinary. People until early in the 20th century, or even until midway through the 20th century, had potentially multiple votes in elections, both at a national level and a local level. In the UK, people had votes deriving from property ownership, from university associations, and various other factors. And there's a speech I came across where one member of Parliament noted that he had 13 votes in various electorates across the country, which he could exercise legitimately because of his property ownership and university associations. It's quite extraordinary. It's only in the mid-20th century that one vote, one value at national elections became enshrined in the UK. And since we're ultimately going to be talking about local government tonight, in the UK, the one vote, one value rule continued in, what wasn't enshrined until 1969. And that was when the business vote for local councils in the UK was abolished for all local council areas, with the exception of the City of London. And the City of London continues to this day to operate on the basis that while residents have a vote, business owners in the City of London also have a vote. And the particular characteristic of the City of London is that there are far more businesses than there are residents. And it's by a factor of about 10. So the residents' vote in London is completely overwhelmed by the business vote. There doesn't seem to be any particular complaint about that, but the City of London is different from the City of Sydney, and the disproportionate numbers of businesses and residents in the City of London is quite different from Sydney. And in every other area in the UK, many of which are intense urban environments and city environments, business owners do not have a vote. So we have in Australia, in all states and territories except for Queensland, businesses have the right to vote for local government elections. And it's the hangover from the UK when the voting system was inherited, and only Queensland has abolished it. In Western Australia, it's under review. There was a report, things moved slowly there. The report was commissioned in 2017, but it only finally came out last year, and it recommended the abolition of the business vote for councils in WA, including without any exception for Perth. So it was a pretty strong recommendation, but it doesn't appear that government has picked it up yet. And the debate in Western Australia at the moment is entirely about, seems to be entirely about the makeup of the upper house in Western Australia, which is, I think, the most unrepresentative parliamentary chamber in Australia. It has quite a rare distinction. There are 6 electorates for the upper house, each of which vote for 6 candidates, and 3 of the electorates are rural and regional electorates, which have each of them a tiny proportion of the number of voters for the 3 Perth electorates. And so in the upper house in Western Australia, there is a huge disparity in favour of rural and regional voters. I'm not aware of any other state which has been looking at the issue of business voting for council elections. But that may be because it's not really an issue in most places. For example, in New South Wales, if you take out the City of Sydney, I think in the 2012 election, there were a total of about 1,600 enrolled businesses enrolled to vote for councils across the whole state. So when you divide that up between the different council areas, local government areas, the number of businesses seeking to exercise their statutory right to vote was minuscule. And so generally, I think you can say that the business right to vote is an anomaly in and of little practical relevance in New South Wales, with the exception of the City of Sydney. It could be abolished without really causing any change to how most people behave, and negligible chance of change to actual council councillors. But there doesn't seem to be any pressure to change. And I mean, this might be my lack of absolute idealism, but it might actually be quite good to have in the system the right of businesses to vote, on the basis that they very rarely exercise that right, and therefore, whilst they potentially do have a say, because they don't exercise the right, they don't really have any actual effect. And if you tried to remove their right to vote, they might seek to have greater influence on councils in other ways. And so the way you might think that the status quo is quite useful. The exception, of course, to everything I've said is the City of Sydney, which has a now quite bizarre system. And if I can work out, if you can just bear with me for a moment, and I'll work out how to share my screen. How does that look? Yes, so you can see that screen now.
Yep, that's coming through.
Okay. You can see that in 2004, 2008, and 2012, the non-residential vote in the City of Sydney was minuscule, and it's always been there. It was always a right that business owners had to enrol or nominate a person to enrol as an elector, and there is a non-residential role, always has been, and it was a right which, for whatever reason, was almost never exercised in a tiny number of cases. And it may have been through a lack of awareness of the right. It might have been because businesses just chose not to engage, although given the extent of political controversy within the City of Sydney, it's hard to believe that people chose not to exercise rights. But in the 2012 election, you can see there that the proportion of the residential role was just over 98% in the total number of votes. So the non-residential votes were trivially small. After the 2012 election, there was some political agitation by the Liberal Party seeking to increase the influence of business on the City of Sydney Council, and there was a New South Wales state parliamentary inquiry into the 2012 local government elections, and a serious attempt was made to adopt the Melbourne system, the voting system that applies, or the electoral system that applies to the City of Melbourne. And the standout feature of that system is that businesses are automatically entered into the non-residential role for councils. That the council has an obligation to identify businesses and identify an individual associated with each business in the City of Melbourne area. And while the business owner has an opportunity to change the person selected in that way, there is an automatic registration for every business in the City of Melbourne. And that's produced a result where business has a very high proportion of the votes in Melbourne. Ultimately, that idea was not adopted in New South Wales, and instead, and I don't quite remember how this came about, but the shooters, fishers, farmers, or whatever they're called now, came up with this idea of giving businesses not one but two votes as a way to redress the system. And it's bizarre, and I haven't been able to find any other example of an elected body where some electors get more votes, explicitly more votes than other electors. It is quite unique. So that the end result is businesses in the City of Sydney can nominate two persons to be on the non-residential voting roll. The persons nominated must not be residents of the City of Sydney, and when they're nominated, their entitlement to be nominated has to be verified by the New South Wales Electoral Commission. And so we've got the elections coming up in September this year, the postponed elections from last year. Perhaps we shouldn't hold our breaths at the moment that those elections are actually going to take place. There may be a risk that they'll get postponed again. But at this stage, council elections are scheduled for September. And in the City of Sydney, the ability to nominate electors for businesses closed about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that is now in the process of being verified by the Electoral Commission, and a final non-residential roll will be determined. You'll see there I've got estimates of the number of electors for residential and non-residential. The non-residential figure comes from a piece in the Sydney Morning Herald a few days ago. It's double the number of non-business electors from the 2016 election. So, but I have no idea how that figure was arrived at. But bear in mind, there are around about 150,000 businesses in Sydney who are eligible to nominate people for the non-residential role. So even, well, in 2016, the 22,000 that was there was after a mail out by the City of Sydney, which was to 138,000 businesses at that time. And that produced 22,000 electors. I don't know the number of businesses exactly now, but obviously somebody giving remarks to the Sydney Morning Herald has decided that the possibility is the number of non-residential electors could double. The residential population in Sydney is also increasing, and 140,000 is my estimate of the, and it's just an estimate based on census figures of what the likely size of the residential roll is going to be for this year's election. So you can see there that if those numbers are right, there is a significant shifting in the proportion of residential and non-residential votes for the City of Sydney, and non-residential voters getting up to 25% of the total vote, which is a lot more than they've ever had in the past. And if that proportion is actually borne out in this election, then I dare say the one vote, one value and the right of business owners to vote at elections is going to come under some political pressure, no doubt, including from yourselves, who I'm quite sure are all strong one vote, one value advocates. I know from my discussions with Andrew in preparing for tonight, I think Andrew counts as a staunch one vote, one value advocate. Yep, there we are. I can see there are some questions in the chat. Maybe I'll just go to those, and I then do have a couple more things that I'll just want to say before I'll open it up more generally. But
okay, thanks a lot, Stephen, for that so far. I can only see one question from Genevieve. Was there somebody else?
No, sorry. The first one there is a
something from
link
Andrew.
to an article.
Thanks for that.
Now a question from Ben. So voting compulsory for the business reps who register? Yes, it is. So it's a curious system. It's not compulsory for the business to nominate an elector or two electors, but once they have done so, it is compulsory. It's compulsory for those nominated electors to vote. And then the 25% figure, yes, that includes the double vote, because the way the double vote works is businesses can nominate two people to be on the non-residential roll. So in that way, businesses get two votes, although the votes have to be split between two individuals. So you get two individuals nominated by a business. Someone has asked, Isabel has asked, how is a business defined? It's there are two ways you can qualify as a business. One is you can be an owner of property, and the other way is you can be a tenant liable for paying the rates. And so that potentially doubles the number of votes for each premises, which is an even greater distortion of the one vote, one value principle. Sylvie, you have your hand up, so I invite you to
I can't see it. Sylvie?
That's right, thank you. Thanks very much, Stephen. That was really helpful. I was wondering if you could, if you had any insight. I was speaking to one of the Melbourne councillors who was talking about the reason that the Melbourne role is so different than the Sydney role, in terms of that there's lots more, he said there were many scale more businesses registered in Melbourne on their role, because the City of Sydney's current administration has chosen to interpret the rules in a way that make it a bit tricky administratively to get on the roll. Now, that was the case last election. I don't know if it's the same this time, because I've noticed that the current administration has been advertising for more businesses to go on the roll beyond just what the council's doing, but actually the political candidates themselves, suggesting they might have changed their position and might want to encourage businesses to enroll. So I wondered if that was one question, if you had any reflection on that. It's kind of the letter of the law and then things that are currently being done to frustrate how it actually works. And the second question I had was if we have any information about, one, how many businesses, it sort of relates to Isabel's question, can multiple vote. I remember talking to a solicitor who was the public officer and a member of the Liberal Party who was the public officer for about 10 businesses that were registered in the city. And he said, that basically means that I'm going to get 20 votes this election. I'm going to walk in, I'm going to vote, I'm going to have 20 votes, because those 10 businesses they're registered in the CBD. They don't have a footprint here really, and they're not interested. But as the public officer, I can register them and then I can exercise their votes. And therefore I will exercise 20 votes.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. Just wind that up before it becomes too many statements and not enough
Yeah,
questions.
so I was just asking about those
to
two.
give
That's quite
other
technical,
people a
but
chance.
yeah.
Thank you very much. 2 questions. Did you get both of those, Stephen?
Yes, I'll deal with the second one first, because I think the second one is easy. I think the answer to that is a person can only be on the roll once, and so I think the way it works, but look, I'm not 100% certain about this, but I don't think you can I don't think a single individual can end up with 10 or 20 votes, because they're not allowed to be on the roll for multiple different businesses. I find that surprising, but then if it was a lawyer who said it to you, well, perhaps I just revert to the usual legal position, which is if you've got 2 lawyers, you've got 2 different opinions. Going back to the first question about why there is the difference between Melbourne and Sydney, and is it Sydney being tricky in the way it interprets the rules, I think the answer lies in what I said about the fact that Melbourne has an automatic enrolment system for non-residential voters, for business representatives, where the Melbourne system involves the council looking at the property ownership register and ASIC records, and where companies, registered companies, owners of property or ratepayers, then the Melbourne system will put an individual director of the company onto the non-electoral roll. Whereas in Sydney, the business has to take a proactive step to register its 2 representatives. The council does not have to be proactive in any way to fill out the non-residential roll, and if businesses choose not to register any individuals, then they will be unrepresented on the roll. And I think that explains that is a big explanation for the difference. So the City of Sydney can undertake an advertising campaign to make businesses aware of the right to enrol. The forms to fill in are a little bit, complicated, but not unnecessarily so. There is one interesting wrinkle which I think also applies between Sydney and Melbourne, and that is, or perhaps some other places, there are some places where the non-residential roll has to be renewed for every election. And then there are other places where the non-residential roll stays in place from election to election. And of course, you can imagine that produces an enormous difference in outcome for the number of non-residential voters. If a non-residential voter, or if a business has to re-nominate every election its representatives, many businesses will just forget to do so, and that will have the effect of suppressing the non-residential vote. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. Thanks for that. And I've got a quick comment from Genevieve that unions who've got offices in the city get a vote. Yes, that was something that we found out about last time. And then there are 2 questions. Andrew, you first.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, so much for your talk so far. I'm just, you mentioned to me you had a slight conflict of interest before, that the New South Wales Council of Civil Liberties has had this right, and you went in to vote or something like that. So perhaps you can answer this question: is how does the business itself, guarantee that the person that they send in on their behalf, their proxy, I guess, votes the way that they want?
Well, that's an excellent question. And sorry, I should have disclosed all of my conflicts of interest at the outset.
I really thought you were going too much on that point.
Yeah, no, I should have done that. That's naughty of me. So the Council for Civil Liberties is in the fortunate position of owning a tiny little strata office in the CBD, and we have exercised our right to enrol 2 representatives to be electors on the non-residential roll. And whilst as a committee we can resolve to ask our enrolled representatives to vote in a particular way, the fact is that it's a secret ballot, and there is no way of knowing whether or not the nominated electors vote in the way which the committee has instructed them to. So, and that is the position for every business.
So I guess, if I was a very pro-business oriented business owner, I'd just nominate the person who I thought whose political views align most with mine, I guess, who would likely to vote the most pro-business way, but also someone perhaps who's not on the highest salary, so that their time is extra wasted on a Saturday to use up their time to do this kind of democratic task. That's more of a comment than a question, obviously.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, it's as to the time thing. I mean, that's another, way in which elections can be manipulated or affected, depending on just how value laden your language wants to be. But and you see it in the US at the moment, the availability of postal voting and absentee voting is of critical importance in determining the actual rollout. In the US, of course, voting is not compulsory, so it's even more important. But here, where where voting is compulsory, there is still a much bigger turnout when postal and absentee voting is made easier, and it is being there in most elections now. The old rules about needing a valid excuse for postal voting or absentee voting have been wound back, and it is much easier than it used to be, and that certainly encourages people to vote. Roger, what is the rationale in Sydney for a business to have 2 votes? There is no rationale is the answer to that. It's pure, it's a purely cynical attempt to skew the election outcome towards business interests. There can be, well, the way in which it's expressed is due to the nature of the CBD and the City of Sydney local government area, where the facilities and public spaces are used by businesses and business workers and non-residents to the extent which they are, then it's appropriate to give those interested parties two votes for each business, but there's no logic to it. I mean, why not 5 votes? Why not 10 votes? Why not do a proportion based on the number of workers who commute into the CBD compared to the number of residents? You could once you've decided to depart from the one business, one vote principle, then there is no real rationale for the number that you pick. And going back to what I said at the outset about one vote, one value, one vote, one value as a principle, of course, would result in businesses having 0 votes, because under one vote, one value, votes attached to individuals only.
And I think Roger asked another question, Stephen.
Yes, and that's a really interesting question. Would a fixed number of councillors representing business be more democratic? I suppose you look to Hong Kong for an example where you have a fixed number of candidates, a fixed number of members of the legislature in Hong Kong, which are business nominated, not elected. I think one would hesitate to say Hong Kong at the moment is a shining example of democracy. And certainly the fact that not all of the legislature was elected by the whole of the community is a factor in saying, well, it's not a very democratic system. The Western Australian report, which has recommended the abolition of business voting for councils in Western Australia, has tried to address the question, well, should there be some other system which ensures that business interests are properly represented in council decisions? And one of the ideas which it mentions is, business advisory councils or business advisory groups to provide advice to the elected councils, and that's possibly a way. So I come back to the position that unless you're an absolute purist, you just want a system which, on the face of it, gives business no excuse for saying that it's not properly represented, and achieve outcomes like we have been achieving in the City of Sydney with a council which is very pro public interest and very pro residents' interests, but it maintains good relations with business as well. And sorry, there's one more disclosure which I ought to make, and that is in my legal practice, I do act for one of the City of Sydney councillors, and when he was elected to the council in 2016, the validity of his election was challenged by a disgruntled resident in the City of Sydney area, and we ended up in NCAT in some glorious proceedings, which ultimately confirmed the validity of my client's election. But we had a lot of fun about eligibility of candidates and issues to do with candidates who had contracts for the supply of services to council, and whether that caused conflicts of interest, made them ineligible, and so forth. It was a interesting little sidelight. But then, as a result of that, I do have a connection to one of the city councillors, and I must say some of my views tonight perhaps reflect some of that councillor's views. Certainly, the fact that council is burdened with the cost of maintaining the non-residential role is an issue which he is concerned about.
Yes, as was the article in the Sydney Morning Herald that highlighted the cost. Yes, I have no other questions coming up in the chat. Were there any other questions for Stephen? I've got nothing more come up, and Andrew has actually said that there's a link to the question that happened, the discussion that happened previously about this very same topic. So follow that one. Andrew, that's available, isn't it, on our Facebook page, that link? Andrew, is that link available? The link that you just added.
My connection might be not that good. I'm getting a bit of buffering.
I was just saying that you'd put up a link to the last forum that we had where this was discussed. That's available on our Facebook. Is it? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. That link, that YouTube starts at the exact point at which the question was raised, and you get the response from the Lord Mayor and all the candidates there. It's quite interesting.
Isabel, you have a question here. Would you like to ask that about, or can Stephen see that?
Is there a legal constitutional case that could be taken? That's a great question. I hope so, because as a lawyer, that's what one loves to do. I don't think so. Is the answer, at least off the top of my head. Councils, local government councils, are purely the creature of state government, and their organisation is really determined by state government legislation. Local government is not recognised in the Australian Constitution as one of the mentioned types of government, and there are no protections in the Australian Constitution for local government. And I have this feeling that there have been attempts in the High Court to raise constitutional issues to protect local government interests, and they've all failed in the sense that the High Court has said that it's all a matter for the states to determine. And over time, you can see enormous changes in the way local government is organised. There's constant pressure on boundaries, amalgamations and so forth. The boundaries of the City of Sydney Council, for example, have changed many times over the years. There's nothing in the New South Wales Constitution that is, there is nothing in the New South Wales Constitution. There is almost nothing in the New South Wales Constitution. New South Wales Constitution is a peculiar document, and it doesn't have any fundamental rights or protections anywhere in it. So the only the system of voting is set up in the City of Sydney Act. For all other councils, it's set up in the Local Government Act. and the New South Wales Parliament is ultimately responsible for that, for the way that legislation is. You know, when the time is right, somebody should try and undo the 2014 amendments, which gave 2 votes to businesses. But I'm not well. This government, the New South Wales Liberal government, wouldn't support that change, and I'm not sure that Labor is going to talk about the issue very much. Certainly, the only consistent commentary on it tends to come from the Greens, and the Greens are advocating abolition of the business vote, the non-residential role altogether.
I wondered, Sophie, did I see you put your hand up, or were you just having a stretch earlier?
Sylvie, you mean?
Sylvie? You were just having it. I thought I saw a hand.
No, I didn't put my hands up.
Okay, no, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Thank you. Look, we've got another 4 or 5 minutes before 8:30. That's if we're going to wrap it by then. So if there's any final questions before I make sure that, and Andrew, I must not forget that you put a note in there to direct people to the petition, to sign the petition. So I'll say it now while I'm thinking about it. Thank you. Are there any final questions? Because Andrew, do you want to take it?
Actually, I formulated a motion for the meeting to pass, and I just want to put that up on the screen and see what people think, and we can write to the Minister for Local Government. So do you mind if I just share that? Can everybody see that?
Yep.
So it was just kind of pretty quick, but I just sort of captures the spirit of that. I declares that the City of Sydney Amendment Elections Bill 2014 is undemocratic and violates the self-evident principle of one vote, one value. We call upon the New South Wales State Government to repeal it without delay.
Holly, could I say something?
Who's that? Who's speaking there?
Genevieve.
Genevieve, yes. Well, Genevieve, is it addressing this motion, or is it? So,
oh well, yeah. It's just a question. I support the motion, but I'm just wondering, what was, if this just gets repealed? So it's a question to Stephen, I guess. What was the position before the amendment came in? Did the businesses have one vote just if they registered, or?
Yes. Businesses had one vote, and as you saw from the statistics, before 2012, before 2016, which was the first election after the bill, there were very, very few business enrolments in practice. Although, yeah, that probably just reflects the fact that it wasn't promoted, and very few people knew about it.
So follow-up question. So did the amendments
thank you.
Oh, sorry. Did the amendments force the council to do all that advertising?
Yeah, go ahead, Genevieve. Final question.
Not directly, in that there's no requirement in the legislation that a campaign be undertaken, but in the politics of the time, the City of Sydney's one of the strategies that the City of Sydney, I think, engaged in to try and oppose these amendments was to say they're unnecessary because the City of Sydney is taking appropriate steps to promote the non-residential role. And it wrote to, as I said, 138,000 businesses seeking the nomination of electors. And I think one of the answers to, or one of the reasons why the 2014 amendments should be repealed lies in, well, if businesses are going to have a vote, it should be on the basis of equal representation with residents, that is one business, one vote. And businesses can opt to nominate somebody or not, but they shouldn't be led to fail to nominate through ignorance. That, if they are going to have a right to vote, then there should be, it should be fairly drawn attention to.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Look, just before it runs away with us, there's lots and lots of chat. I want to relate it back directly to Andrew's motion that he's put up there. So can we take a vote on this? Those of you who are on chat, can is there anybody who can't say yes or no to Andrew's motion? Unless there's anyone who wants to make amendments, you can make a friendly amendment if Andrew agrees with it. And we don't need to go through the formal process of a seconder, because this is not one of those constitutions, is it, Andrew, as far as I know?
No.
Can I just suggest an amendment saying that because the City of Sydney Amendments Elections Bill was passed and made changes to the City of Sydney Act, so the motion should say something like this meeting declares that the amendments to the City of Sydney Act made by the City of Sydney Act made by
City of Sydney amendments.
Well, City of Sydney Act.
And the amendments actually the amendments made by this City of Sydney.
You can do that.
To the existing laws, which was called the what?
City of Sydney Act.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that getting right?
Yep, that's fine.
This meeting declares that the amendments made by
and violate
are undemocratic and violate single. Yep.
Violate self. Yep.
The self-evident principle: one vote, one value. I use the word self-evident to kind of just conjure up the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
Very colourful, Andrew.
I'm not sure that there is anything self-evident about it, but anyway, there we are.
Okay, so Andrew, does that cover what you were?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, and how's that then for everybody? Are we? Roger's put some. Roger, what did you want in there?
Just repeal it, like that.
Delete without delay.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Roger, isn't it? Yeah.
And it should be repeal them.
To repeal, sorry?
Them rather than it.
Oh, to repeal them. Oh, yeah, I see.
I mean, normally a motion would have a time frame around it. But I take Roger's point. What do we think about that? That there's no time frame around it.
Well, the electoral rolls for this election, if they occur in September, are set. So nothing that is done now is going to affect the elections.
No.
Even they could just change it so all those businesses on the roll would just get one vote. That if the Parliament wanted to, next month they could just say, well, we repeal it. They use the business roll and the business gets one vote, and that's all that would happen. So it would technically be possible to do it before the election, wouldn't it?
Well, you'd have to take people off the roll because it's not the business itself that's on the non-residential roll. It's the individuals who are nominated by the business who are on the non-residential roll. So you would have
I see what you mean. There's two each instead of just one.
That's right. So you'd have to go through and remove half the people, potentially half the people on the roll, and you'd have to work out which half to remove, which might be problematic.
Could we ask for this to happen then as a matter of urgency, or without, I'm trying to think of something that's as soon as possible after the election?
Well,
to repeal them at the first opportunity.
If it's not possible before the election, then we don't need to say that, you know. So as soon as does it sound softer? You go practicable or something, or possible?
How about at the time of the next? They do the statute law. What's it called? SLR. You know, where they just put through a series of amendments every 6 months as a package in the Parliament. I think it's called, Stephen, you would know, statute law.
Yeah, I think this would have, I don't think, because all of that is done as sort of very administrative sort of changes. This wouldn't be within the scope of that.
Right. Okay.
So where do we want to leave that? Are we sitting with something we're happy to do a little agreement on or a vote on?
Yes.
I'm happy. Okay. So do you want to just just put it into the chat so that I can get a general idea? Yes, we've got. Yep. More. Just put either a yes or a hand up or whatever, or a tick. Yes. All the yeses are coming up. Or no, in fact, if you want to say no. And fuzzy, whoever you are, thank you very much. Great. Okay. Is everyone's vote in? Okay, thank you very much. It's a yes then. Thanks very much for everybody for that. So let's draw this to a close because you've done very well. We've just gone over the hour. Very good. Thanks so much for that. And Stephen, very big thanks to you. And thank you for reminding me that I was actually a resident of the city of Sydney when I was a student nurse for a year. And we were obliged to live in what looked like nuns' quarters, but within the walls of the city of Sydney. But I missed the opportunity to vote for Ken Livingstone. I'd long gone by then. But thanks for that reminder. And thank you for that. That was really great. Lots, I'm sure, that we've all learned from it. If questions come up, I'm sure, Andrew, are you wanting to?
Yeah, just wanted to say that to thank Stephen, the Friends of Erskineville's chipped in for a bottle of wine for you, which we'll get over to you as soon as the lockdown lifts. And also, the Friends of Erskineville has also made a $50 donation to the New South Wales Council of Civil Liberties. And thank you very much.
That's very much appreciated. And it was a pleasure to talk to you tonight. And I really enjoyed having a look at the issue.
Lovely. Thank you so much for everything. And any other questions we'll direct to you later through Friends of Erskineville. Thank you so much. And good night, everybody. Thanks for participating. Okay. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you, Holly.
Thanks, everyone.
And just want to tell everybody also, don't forget that the Friends of Erskineville with Red Watch and Alexandria Residents Action Group is holding a candidates forum for the Lord Mayoral candidate on Wednesday, the 11th of August at 7 p.m. So join along for that.
Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. Okay, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, Holly.
Bye.
See you, Roger. Bye, Sylvie. Bye, Kate.
Bye.
Bye, Ben.